For 5 minutes.
I thank the Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. H.R. 2362 is simply a bill to facilitate economic development in Indian country and to expand the range of options open to some of the poorest and most disadvantaged of Americans, the first Americans. Currently, as my friend Mr. Hastings pointed out, economic development is often hampered in Indian country by restrictive leasing practices on Indian reservations. H.R. 2362 directs the Secretary of the Interior to create a demonstration project for up to 6 tribes engaged in economic development with foreign companies and foreign countries. Tribes will develop the guidelines for their own economic activity with these entities. The Secretary will approve them, and we will, over time, learn how to do business between Indian tribes and foreign countries, something, frankly, we know comparatively little about. One of the things that comes out of this is a development by the Secretary of the Interior of recommendations and best practices, something which needs to be done in this area. We have tried in the course of this legislation to recognize the concerns raised by some people about it. There's no question that I was approached by the Turkish-American coalition. So there's a deep interest in Turkey and American Indians. It has been for many hundreds of years. This goes back a long way. They're the only country that's actually sent a national delegation to an Indian Economic Development Conference. There are scholarships for Native American students at the Istanbul Technical Institute. There's a constant movement of tribal citizens going back and forth and facilitating. So this interest, apart from these other disputes, is real and genuine and deep. And so we've accepted some of the concerns that were voiced in subcommittee. There is no preferential status for Turkey in this bill. All 155 World Trade Organization countries will have exactly the same opportunity. It's important to note, I think, that this bill is strongly supported in Indian country. Maybe we should listen to Indians about what's best for their own economic development. The National Congress of American Indians supports this bill. The National American Indian Housing Council supports this bill. The National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development supports this bill. Numerous tribes support this bill. Perhaps they are the real experts here that we should be listening to. Passage of this bill would normally be a routine matter in this House. Frankly, but due to the strong Turkish interest and support for the bill, we have a number of ethnic communities in the United States who've voiced objections. I think that's always legitimate and always appropriate. But sadly, as I pointed out, some of these objections don't have much merit. Again, this is not special legislation for Turkey. All 155 World Trade Organizations can participate. That includes the folks that are so concerned about this. Second, the idea that passing the Hearth Bill, which, by the way, I strongly supported, co-sponsored, came down here and argued for, I think it was a wonderful piece of legislation. It's largely silent, save for one phrase, on foreign investment. We do not have a lot of experience here. It would be helpful to have demonstration projects. It would be good to have the Secretary of the Interior involved more deeply. And third, and I hope this isn't the case, I've heard recently that there's even a sheet going around, perhaps not true, I hope not, that suggests this legislation will cost domestic manufacturing jobs. You've got to be kidding. Putting jobs on Indian reservations is going to take American jobs away. Who were the first Americans? So again, the arguments, I think, largely do not address the legislation. I understand something about historical grievances and controversies. I'm the only Native American in this House right now. My great-great-grandfather, when he was 13 years old, was forced to move from Mississippi, where his people had lived for 500 years, to avoid being placed under state restriction. His lands were confiscated. They were guaranteed new land in Indian Territory in the West. He arrived, nothing started, ended up being actually the clerk of the Chickasaw Supreme Court. His son, my great-grandfather, was treasurer at the time of the Dawes Commission, when guess what? Those treaties that were going to last forever were revoked again by the United States government. Indian Territory was opened up over the objection of the tribes to white settlement, and Indian governments were ground down. My family has spent much of the time since that time working with other Chickasaws and other Native Americans to see tribal sovereignty restored in those rights. That's why I co-chair the Native American Caucus. That's why when the Tribal Law and Order Bill came to this floor, where there were concerns on our side about process, I got the Republican votes that were necessary to pass it. That's why I was the Republican lead sponsor of the Cobell settlement. That's why I've worked with this administration, which, by the way, has a great record on Native American affairs, on the Carcieri bill. So I understand grievances, and I understand the legitimacy of expressing them. But legislation must be relevant. I ask the gentleman for additional 2 minutes.
Gentleman, I yield the gentleman an additional 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 additional minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Legislation must be relevant to the historical experience that we're talking about. And we ought to look for opportunities to make old enemies into new friends. I try to do that on this floor every day. This legislation has nothing to do with ancient or current disputes between Turkey and Armenia or Greece. This bill is about helping American Indians. We ought to put aside the disputes of the old world and focus on helping the original inhabitants of the new world, which is exactly what this legislation will do.